Hey, what's up, guys? It's Nicholas Davenport, and on today's episode of Industry Pathology is episode 5. I want to talk about this mental coaching blind spot. Now, this is something I definitely integrate into Mind Body One's mission, and everyone who knows me knows how I emphasize this thing that most mental coaches are overlooking, and that's cognitive performance. Now, it seems pretty obvious, something that affects how the brain actually processes and performs will be integrated into this industry. But believe it or not, it really isn't, especially at the graduate level. I've talked to so many students that don't understand working memory load, cognitive performance, inhibition control, the Stroop effect, in-back tasks. The list goes on. And this is a problem because understanding this is what separates a true mental performance coach and the difference between a motivational speaker or a life coach. Because without that, you're just giving advice or tips and skills on how to live and perform great. But how do you make it make sense and give it in a scientifically backed way, but also practical and applied? So you need to learn how to integrate cognitive performance into your practice and into your skill sets. Now, let's start with this. If we're going into a session with a client, more than likely have some kind of performance issue. Now, that could be simple as they're not focusing during sport or in school, or maybe they need help with goal setting, or what we all use the term mindfulness, right? Very overused term, I think, in this industry, but let's go with that. What's that really comprised of? A lot of times it's really how is stress affecting them, anxiety. These two terms are a big factor on why most people in any field don't perform well. Now let's look at stress. What happens? You go into the fight or flight mode, which is the physiological and psychological mode to tell your brain, hey, something's up. We need to get ready for this action. So let's send that epinephrine, that norepinephrine, the cortisol, whatever neurochemicals that's needed. We're going to flood that through your body, flood it through your bloodstream, and make you ready for action or handling this stressor. Now, just from that point alone, you can see where this is going in the sense of into our actual physiology. And this goes way beyond just how do you think and how we can give you some skills to get through it. Now, stress. On one side of stress, we have management. And on the other side of stress, we have how much cognitive load can we utilize to get through this stressful moment. Now, either on this side with stress management is how well you optimize and organize your thoughts. And on this side of cognitive performance or cognitive load is how much can you really take on. And it's always a balance between the two. So you're either doing one or the other very well, but the ones who perform the best can do both. And this is why you need to learn cognitive performance. So I'm going to ask you this. What actually comes to your mind when I say the term cognitive performance? I've had people automatically segue this to just reaction time. They think about like a fit light drill. So it's a tool that we use a lot here at Mind Body One, which is a part of it. Some people simply think about brain games. And I hate the term brain games because we don't call strength training muscle games. We don't call cardio lung games. So why do we call brain training or mental training brain games? But that's another topic. But basically, I look at it as how do we optimize our thinking? And this is processes from the frontal lobe, executive function, if you will, that takes all things you put into play into consideration and how you manipulate this information, working memory. Do you know that term? You really should, because your working memory capacity is going to dictate how well you are able to process stress, anxiety, and how it affects your long-term memory, which is going to be impeded when you are in these stressful fight or flight scenarios and think about in a game or a sport or whatever demographic you work with. If that's impeded, how do you make the best decisions? So we can sum it all up in just thinking clearly and being mindful, but there's so many underlying mechanisms to look at. So from this video, I want you to go to your own database on what you think about cognitive performance and look at the terms working memory, inhibition control, attentional blink. I want you to look at things like the Stroop effect, in-back tasks, the flanker tasks, and anything that revolves around those, because these are just a few of the key components that will help you delve down this path of understanding cognitive performance, but in a way it can be applied to your training. Think about this. If you can analyze how well they can process information, whether it be through a brain training task or just understanding and educating them on how their brain takes information, it unlocks a whole path on how you can look at their performance. Because a lot of times performance issues aren't just, oh, I messed up. There might be some kind of barrier on what's happening in real time. I keep striking out the plate. Yeah, you might be going through a lot of anxiety and pressure, but how do you get your mind to think about that? Like CBT is in the word, cognitive behavioral therapy. And we put a lot of emphasis on the behavioral therapy part of that word. But what about the cognitive, which means how we think? So you would think this would be a no-brainer, pun intended, but we need to put more emphasis on this, because when I'm working with clients, let's say we're doing one of our cognitive tasks that are more sport specific, I'm looking on one, their mannerisms, It's more nuanced than just, oh, did they do a good job? I'm looking at if they're tight, they're not breathing. I'm looking at if they're saying outward self-talk that is unproductive and not beneficial. I'm looking at all of this. And the beauty of it is when I can see the actual scores or stats, now I can put it in a parameter of this is where we need to be. Now, from the sport specific or the task specific for their appropriate demographic, because we do this with all types of populations, then I can look at, well, this is not efficient as you need it to be because we're giving you more overload. And look how you're faltering. We have parameters in our methods where we know if they're in a certain range, if they falter even beyond that, it's affected by the actual stressors. Because a lot of times people look at these like brain games, as I said, but it's really saying how much do you deviate from the needed performance, right? There's going to be some deviation because we're adding extra stressors. But if it goes beyond that parameter that we set, we can at least assume that the stressor played a bigger factor on your performance. And what do we do in the real performance? Just that. So you see how that can be tied in? Also, from a coaching point, you can pinpoint coaching cues that you would not be able to really see watching them in the actual game or them just telling you it in a session because it's a subjective measure of what they perceive. And that's great, but you can objectively look outside looking in and make your deductions, and it can give you so much value on how you're able to make sense of that. I made a video last week where I went over just that with one of my boxers, and we turned one of the boxing drills into an actual coaching tip or coaching cue, I should say, to help them be able to make sense of what was going through their mind while trying to do the task. So that alone gives so much value. Now, what about working with other industries? I talked about earlier how what separates you from a true mental performance practitioner and just a motivational speaker or a life coach. Usually those people, they don't really have the science. They're more so giving you inspiration, which is great. I have a friend who's a great motivational speaker. He knows his stuff and he definitely does a great job. But he doesn't understand this side of the performance field. And that's the issue when you really need to get results that are backed and can be replicated, right? And is that the biggest part when it comes to science? Can it be replicated and can it be done consistently? And that's something we can do with this. We know these different cognitive components, working memory, attention control, inhibition control. These are things we can measure. We can do different tasks such as Stroop tasks and different variations of it to see how it's affecting them and make a decision of what we can do to make it more efficient for the participant. So to further separate yourself, you'll be able to go to different practitioners that you're going to have to work with, such as strength coaches, the sport-specific coaches, the CEO of a company, the manager, the management team, whoever it is, to give more relevance and validation. This is something that's going to be helpful. When I go into a potential contract meeting with an organization that's looking to spend a lot of money to bring our services in, I can't just say it's great for them. And that's a problem I see a lot of, especially upcoming practitioners. They think being passionate about this field and helping people with their mindset is enough. It isn't. No one cares. And I don't mean it in the sense of they don't care about it. It's just that anyone could say that and then want to sell you something. When it's about parting with money, because remember, this is always business. I want you always to take this episode as a business-minded person. It's going to come down to why should I part money? And giving more objective feedback from the cognitive side goes a lot further because it's more tangible. That alone gives you that much more value. So you need to make sure you brush up on your basic cognitive science. Now, you don't need a PhD in this. I don't have that. I've done a lot of work, a lot of research in it, but I want you to research on a daily basis. Try to read at least 1 or 2 studies a week. This way you're getting more knowledgeable about how this makes sense in general and then how could it better apply to what you're doing. Now, what's my diagnosis on today's episode? Cortex-free coaching. It kind of gives it away in the name. You're not including enough aspects of cognitive performance into your practice. It's not just about asking about how they feel. It's not just about teaching them box breathing, visualization techniques. And know what the crazy thing is? All that requires cognitive aspects. When you do box breathing, it's triggering the vagus nerve, which is in your brain, runs through down to your diaphragm to trigger that parasympathetic response. Or if you talk about visualizations, once again, motor neurons are firing to be triggered. I don't want to keep this episode going, but do you see just that? So make sure you're adding more cognitive performance into your coaching. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a great rest of your week. And that's my pathology.